cafe with all the hackers. And they were giving us tea, and they said, be careful on drug tests, which was a little bit disturbing. But Wendy has got a long history, former CISO, researcher with 451, great resume, great insight into security. You may have heard things like security at the poverty line. She came up with that and other ideas. Very influential. And if you follow her Twitter feed, you guys know the guy who hacked the airplane, right? Side Dragon. You guys all saw that, and he made the airplane fly sideways. Yeah, she hacked his phone, 2 days ago now?
2 days ago.
2 days ago now. So the hacker that hacks hackers, she also sent me a copy of her slides ahead of time, which was nice, informed me to enable macros and disable my antivirus before previewing. They looked great. So, big round of applause for Wendy Nather.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Wolf. That's the first time somebody's introduced me. As we met in Colombia over a cup of very suspicious tea. Actually, it was really good for altitude sickness. It was awesome. Let me come this way. Yes? That way? Now this way? Oh, I have to stay in the camp. Really? Oh, all right. All right. Wait, now we go. So, okay, let me start out with why do I have garlic here on my slide? It's because I've decided that cyber, the word cyber, is like garlic. There are some cultures that love garlic, that put it in everything, tastes wonderful, 40 cloves of cyber, with your chicken, that sort of thing. And it's really a term of art, especially in cultures where physical security plays a major, major role. You have to distinguish it somehow, so you say cyber. Then there are other cultures who have never encountered garlic before, and they go, whoo, oh, get to step back. I can't stand that cyber. Those cyber folks, they reek of it. But, it's okay. The only thing is that if you're in a committed relationship, make sure that both of you have the same amount of cyber every day so that you can, handle each other. So, speaking of cyber, how much of it do you really need? And again, this is going to depend on your culture to some extent, but I just want to say right now, if you know the answer, come on up here so we can get out of here early. How much security do you really need? So we're going to be talking about models for security spending, which are really exciting, right? Right? Okay. But I'm going to tell you that even the experts don't know how to price out a security program. I'm going to ask whether we can do better. I'm going to talk about evaluating the risk in a way that works for you. And I almost used the word paradigm here. I'm really sorry. I got excited. I crossed it out. It's better now. Going beyond the current security practices. So the answer to this question, how much security do you really need? The answer may surprise you. Everybody click. Models for security spending. How many people in here are responsible for figuring out a security budget? Anybody? Okay. I'm sorry. We'll drink later. One of the things the first questions that come up, especially with management, is, well, what are our peers doing? And everybody wants to go to benchmarking. And I'll tell you that I hate benchmarking. The reason is because, first of all, the questions that you ask in benchmarking are very binary. Are you using laptop encryption? Well, I don't know. You mean right now? You mean all of them? Or just some of them? What if 3/4 of our company is? Do we say yes or do we say no? Those are not good answers because the answer is always it's complicated. The other reason is because it's hard to figure out who your peers are. There are, I think a couple of years ago in the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, they did some risk profiling for different industries, and they found that, for example, mid-sized banks and smaller banks had a risk profile more in common with retail than they did with big banks. So if you're just trying to go, well, what's our industry vertical and those are our peers, you may be wrong. The other thing is that depending on how you have your IT infrastructure set up, it may not be practical for you to do what your peers are doing. Or what you think your peers are doing. It's better sometimes, depending on what you're comparing, to look at a very different sort of operation who is using the same kind of IT infrastructure that you are. And say, how are you securing that? That might be useful for us to do. And then finally, another pitfall with benchmarking is that it can go one of two ways with your management. You can say, well, our peers are doing this, and your management can say, well, we're not doing that, so maybe we should. And that's, the best possible outcome. The other one is, well, you're asking for something that none of your peers are doing, so why should we be doing it? The problem is with benchmarking is, what if your peers suck at security? Yeah. That is the problem, and that's a problem I ran into when I was a CISO. I would go to vendors and they would say, well, you're the only one asking for this. Like, well, so do I not get it? I'm trying to make things better. I'm not trying to stay the same as my peers. So benchmarking can be okay, but you have to be really, really careful with it. I guess it's kind of like, if we're going to go back to the recipe analogy, I don't know, what's an ingredient that's really hard to use well? I don't know, cilantro. Some people think it tastes like soap. If you use a little bit too much, oh my God, it's bad. Compliance-driven spending. Unfortunately, sorry, I'm going out of camera to get my vodka. Sorry. I can't work without vodka. And you CISOs know that. The truth is that a lot of CISOs, the only way they can get to spend money is if they tie it into compliance. Because compliance is the risk that everyone believes in. They believe in the auditor. They've seen the auditor. They've seen the auditor walking in the halls. They've sat across the table from the auditor. That's the risk they believe in 100%, not necessarily the hacker. So, a lot of CISOs have to tuck in their spending under compliance just to get what they think they need for security. Metrics-driven is great if you have the right metrics. Please do not tell me how many packets your firewall has stopped, because that makes me really cranky. Yay. Umbrellas do not tell you how many raindrops they've stopped. These are not useful metrics. But there are great conferences, Metricon, Siricon, and so on, where you can talk with people who have chosen effective metrics that actually help them make good business decisions in security. Evidence-driven. Wouldn't that be great if we had evidence-driven security? Which didn't have to lead to getting a breach, if that was not the only indicator of whether it was working. That would be really nice. I don't think we're there yet, but if you think differently, I would love to hear about it. Here are some other models for security spending. Spend only what you need to until the next breach, which in any other part of business actually makes sense. Why spend more than you need to spend? Business people are all about spending only the right amount or maybe less. If they can get away with less, you've increased your profit margin and you're doing better. So this is a fundamental for business, which is why it's hard to get agreement to spend more than what they think you need, especially for something that may or may not happen. Keep spending until you run out of budget. That's probably what everybody does. What's your budget? I don't know. Just give me a number and I'll spend all of it. I used to have discussions with my CIO about, he'd say, well, what do you need? And I said, well, what do you give me? Well, tell me what you need. Well, how much are you willing to give me? Because I can give you a whole long list of what I need. We would have this discussion back and forth until one of us blinked and actually set a number. Have an unlimited budget. Isn't that a great idea? Wouldn't that be nice? I've heard rumors that Chris Hoff at Bank of America has an unlimited budget, like really unlimited budget. I heard about somebody at RMISC in Denver this week who said that they had a blank check for security. I'm like, oh. But this doesn't happen very often. Really, what security spending leads to is what Rick Holland, who was formerly a Forrester analyst, called expense in depth. I love this because this is what really ends up being. You keep buying things to layer over, stuff. If I could, I would go back in time and I would kill baby AV. I would kill baby Hitler. Because I think antivirus is the point where we said, oh, our system's vulnerable to something, let's just put something else over it. Let's write something different. If somebody had gone back and said, no, wait, go back and fix the original system, then maybe we would not have the industry that we have today, the billions and billions of dollar industry that is all built on securing things after the fact. This sort of model leads to overspending in some areas because a lot of products have overlap. They all, a lot of them are doing the same things on the endpoint, or they're doing the same things on the network, and underspending in others, and also overloading systems. I know many institutions right now where the security people cannot put their own agent on the endpoint because there are already too many other agents running and it slows it down. They have to prove that they're in the middle of a breach before they're allowed to deploy agents to find out what's going on. They have to, figure that out. They have to prove first that there's reasonable suspicion of a breach before they can deploy the instrumentation to figure out whether they're in the middle of a breach. So we're in a pretty pickle here. Did I just date myself by saying pretty pickle? I probably did. Yes, sorry. So dueling agents, the other thing is you have to prioritize network decisions. If you've got a perimeter and you've got 3 or 4 different things on the perimeter, what do you put out first? Probably your anti-DDoS appliance to protect the firewall from getting overloaded, which also has to listen to the WAF, which has to listen to the load balancers. What order do you put these network-based appliances in? Same thing with endpoint agents. If they're dueling each other and one of them is calling the other malware, who wins? You have to deal with that. And also there's cognitive overload on your personnel. I don't think we talk about this enough. Every time you need to learn a new tool, it takes up a disproportionate amount of space in your head. It's, people are going, yes, oh God, yes. So just because you physically have the time, maybe, theoretically, to do something does not mean that your brain can give it the attention that it needs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So expense and depth leads to all of these problems. I asked this question when I was working for 451 Research. I surveyed a bunch of professionals, and I gave them a hypothetical. I said, I'm a new CISO, it's my first day on the job, they've never done security. What do I buy? Just that, what do I buy? And I got so many different answers. First of all, a couple of people said, that's a ridiculous scenario, that would never happen. Yes, everybody laughs. That was exactly what happened the first day when I was working for the Texas Education Agency. I came in, I was the only security person, and they said, we need your budget request by the end of the day. I still have people coming to me and saying, I've got a new client, and they haven't done security before. What should I tell them to buy first? By the way, when I put in my budget request, I put in a $2,000 request. I think I asked for 1 logging server and a couple of books. And the person I was reporting to at the time scribbled it out and said, where do you think you are, the private sector? So I had a budget of 0 when I started. A budget of 0. So yeah, even the experts don't know. People listed as few as 4 different technologies that you absolutely needed to buy, and as many as 31. And you can guess that the person who listed 31 worked for a bank, because they can afford to buy one of everything. Everybody said it depends. I don't know. It depends on your data classification. It depends on your geographic distribution. It depends on your industry. Depends on your threat model. There was one guy who said, don't buy anything for the first year, do a risk assessment first. And he was a risk assessment consultant. Like, okay, so we won't buy a firewall for a year until we figure out what our risk is. That's a good idea. Everybody said that. So when I finally, got everything down to the most common average of technologies that everybody listed, then I went to vendors and said, what would this cost me for a 1,000-person organization? And they said, it depends. There are very few vendors who will actually put pricing on their website. There are very few who will give you a number when you call on the phone. Well, it depends. Let me send 15 salespeople over to you. By the way, Duo puts his prices on his website. But we will send 15 salespeople if you want, if you really want. We're great for parties. But, you know, they could not give me a number. So, you know, at the end of the day, it turned out to be that the minimum baseline's pretty well matched what PCI gives you. Everybody had to list firewalls and AV. Even the ones who said, oh, firewalls are dead, AV is dead. You can't not buy firewalls and AV. You just can't. But the budget could be off by as much as a factor of 4 because of this huge swing in what things could cost. So you're sitting there in front of an empty spreadsheet your first day on the job. You have no idea with your budget what you actually need. And of course, there's still no guarantee you won't get breached. So this is why I drink. Can we do better? Because I don't want to leave everybody depressed. I think we can. First of all, this is a matrix by a guy named Sunil Yu, who is at a large financial institution. He open sourced this model, though, so I can use his name. He called it the Cyber Defense Matrix, and it's a really nice matrix that I think covers what needs to be covered without being so incredibly complicated that everybody's eyes glaze over when they can contemplate using it. You're talking about verbs up here, identifying things, protecting them, detecting them, responding, and recovering, and at different layers, devices for applications, network, data, and people. Don't forget the people. And what's really cool is that you might kind of notice that as you are going this way, you're relying on technology, people, and process to different extents. For identifying, protecting, you can automate a lot of that. Technology works fine for that. When you get into responding and recovering, you're really going to rely more on people. A lot of that is more manual. And the process, you always need process. You need the same amount of process. What he describes it as is left and right of boom, which is the breach. So pre-compromise and post-compromise, you know, he drives it right there. And then you can start populating this with products and technologies. So, you know, for identifying applications, you've got your Jira, you've got your Jamf, whatever. NetFlow for networking, data labeling. Here are all the technologies, phishing simulations for people to identify those who might be more vulnerable to phishing. Phishing awareness for protection. All of these things, and yes, I do have Brian Krebs in the FBI under detection. Brian Krebs is my IDS. You'll also kind of notice that there's not a whole lot of technologies over on this end. So if you are an entrepreneur and want to, we're sort of creeping this way, especially for hunting technologies, automation and so on, but there's not that much for recovery. So there may be some market holes there that you might want to look at. The other great thing about this matrix is you can expand it to describe other environments. So vendor assets, services that you're using, third parties, what your customers might have that you are using, you know, in conjunction with yours to help secure them, employee assets, of course, for BYOD. You can use this over and over and over again. There are a lot of layers to this matrix. So it's expandable enough that you can have this discussion with your CIO and say, here's what we've got covered, here's where we have overlap, here's where we need more. And, oh, sorry about this, I didn't test this on the screen. So you can see the rest of the slides at this link. Everybody come up here and click on the link, or just Google for RSAC Sunil Yu. His talk is recorded. I think his slides are up there. That's probably the easiest way. He's right at the top of the Google hit for that. Now, let's talk about trimming your security portfolio. Now it gets really exciting. Why would you do that? We didn't even know what we needed to buy. How do we know what we need to cut back on? Well, for those organizations that have already bought a lot and they've had it for decades and they're trying to rationalize it, they're getting really tired. There are customers who have said, you know, I have 3 storage solutions, I have 87 security technology providers. I've got to do something about this. At RSA a couple of years ago, I led a peer-to-peer session about evaluating and trimming your security portfolio. What can you consolidate, and so on. First of all, mergers and acquisitions leave a lot of redundant products in place. Every time they've got their favorite vendor, you've got yours. You've got to figure out how to do it. There's also shelfware. There's stuff that, you know, you bought, and it usually is the type of technology that requires a lot of people to use, and you just didn't have enough people to pay attention to it. So when Javad Malik was working with me at 451 Research, he did a report about security shelfware, or just Google. Again, sorry about the links. But you can kind of imagine that SIM, for example, turned out to be shelfware very often because it requires a lot of long-term tuning and maintenance. It's not a set and forget. It's you have to have people with a lot of institutional knowledge to use it, because you've got to be able to weed out the false positives. So shelfware is another reason you might want to trim it. Improving performance, you know, consolidating agents that you've got any place, simplifying it. Everybody wants more simplification at this point. When I was at 451, we were tracking as many as 1,200 different security vendors, and that was only the ones that we had time to write down, and those were mostly North America based. We, you know, didn't even get to the rest of the world. 1,200 security vendors, and this is why I have to explain, for example, to my compadres at Duo in sales, the CISOs don't want your calls. You know, they hear CISOs on panels saying, yeah, I just never answer my phone anymore. I delete all my voicemail. You know, I have huge mail filters set up so that anything that sounds like a sales pitch goes straight into my junk folder. I'm sorry. It's just, you know, people are inundated with vendors. But what they do want is better integration and better communication. They are tired of trying to get data out of one thing and parsing it for another tool. Even in things like threat intelligence, there are a lot of tools that don't quite meet up in the middle. They cover, you know, different sections of the process of identifying, collecting, analyzing, hunting, responding, but they don't, you know, one of them doesn't speak in the same format as the other. And I'm sorry, you know, dumping JSON or dumping XML is not the same as integration. And right-click integration is not the same as integration. Yes, you can launch your other tool from our tool. That's not the same as integration. And better price. You can do a lot of market shopping when it's time for you to renew something, go to a bunch of other vendors and just say, you know, has the price come down in the meantime? That's another reason why you might want to trim. But before you cut it, first of all, make sure you're using it right, because in Javad Malik's shelfware research, he found that on the vendor side, they said, well, you know, reasons why our customers weren't really using it is, you know, because they didn't turn any rules on, or, you know, whatever. They weren't using it right. You may want to talk to peers or other people who are using this technology to see if they're using it in an innovative way that you haven't thought of. If you are looking at the product and saying, well, this is not, you know, this isn't doing much for us, maybe there's something that even the vendor hasn't thought of that could be really helpful. So always talk to your peers about it. Talk to the vendor about its limitations and its roadmap, or ask an analyst. This is Christian Renaud, who's now doing IoT security research for 451, and you can see he's having a really good time of it. I think that's him during a briefing, actually. First, and then before you cut it, decide whether you need to replace it. And is it a greater liability to keep it and not use it? Or is it a greater liability not to have it at all? This is something that you really do need to talk about with your management and especially with your legal team. But make sure you already are pretty sure you know the answer before you talk to them about it. Because yes, it's always a question of liability. Did you know that this was happening? Did you know that the breach was happening, or were you not even looking at the output of this tool? Was it not even out of the box? Because checking the box to say, yes, we have this tool, will get you through compliance, but there could be a big liability downside. And of course, before you cut people in security, make sure you know what they're really contributing in terms of expertise and workload. And the expertise includes institutional knowledge. This is not just a matter of eyeballs in the sock looking at something. It's the person who decides, oh yeah, this happens once a year, we know about it, it's okay. So you really need to look at what they understand as well as how much FTE time they're spending on something. And again, remember the cognitive workload. You cannot cut down a number of people and say, oh, they'll still have time to do all this work, or we're going to get the network folks to run this tool instead, especially if it's a WAF. They don't have the software development knowledge to be able to run the WAF. Even though it sits on the network, it is not a tool for the network people necessarily. So make sure that they can give it the attention that it needs. And also, if you have staff in response mode, they cannot be proactive and go and look at things and think carefully about the design and the purpose and the implementation of something if they're always getting calls saying, I need you to come look at this. The proactive mode and response mode are two very different modes for our brains. And you cannot, even if you actually have the right amount of time in your schedule, you know, I've got 5 hours. If they're interspersed with calls, you can't get back to that proactive thinking. So let's talk a little bit about evaluating the effectiveness of what we use and the risk. First of all, is it addressing a risk that everyone can believe in? I talked about how everybody believes in the auditor, not everybody believes in the attacker. And it leads to what I call cheeseburger risk management, which is, you know, where you decide you're going to eat cheeseburgers until your first heart attack and then you're going to stop. And this is exactly what a lot of management decides to do. And who's to say it's not a valid business model for this? Because if it would take you $1 million a year, cost you $1 million a year, let's say, to run a security program, and you don't get breached until the second year, and it costs you $500,000, you came out ahead. There is no arguing with that from a business point of view. I've actually heard a quote from a CIO who's being briefed on threats, imminent threats that were already attacking his peers, and he said, let's just wait until they actually attack us. So this is a very real risk management model. And getting breached just might be cheaper. This is the part where some people start having heart attacks. There was some really good research by Sasha Romanowski at RAND Corporation. Yay, we like Sasha. He came up with some really interesting statistics. That less than 0.4% of annual revenues of the companies that he studied were lost to cybersecurity events in 2013. That's really minimal. That's like shrinkage in the retail industry. That's expected loss. And 0.9% of annual revenues were lost to online fraud, according to that cybersecurity online fraud report, which just goes to show that they were tracking breaches separately from fraud, but whatever. So Romanowski calculated that firms were spending an average of 0.025% of their revenues on security. Really tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. Now buckle up, this is going to get scary. He found that half of the cyber events cost a firm an amount approximately equal to what it spent in IT security. What? What they spent was about as much as they lost in half of the cyber events that happened. what does this even mean? Does it mean they should spend more to lose that? When they lose that small amount, should they be spending less to balance out the amount that they're losing? What? So here's the scary thing that I thought about late at night. What if I told you that you may already be spending enough? Wow. Everybody drink. Everybody drink. This is like head-bending stuff. When you start looking at the data and going, what does this mean in terms of a business decision on on how much security you need? So obviously, if we take a deep breath and step back and say, this cannot be true for all organizations, that they're already spending enough. It cannot be true. Some are not spending any. I don't think anybody's going to say that they're spending enough if they're spending zero. Some of them may be spending too much. Who knows? But, okay, we can take a deep breath because spending is not doing. So you could be spending enough, but not doing it right. Or you could be doing it right, but not spending in the right areas. Those are business decisions that may be separate from how you're actually doing security. So let's think about this one for a bit. This is some kind of pyramid. I don't know. There are geometries of pain that you've seen out there, the pyramid of pain, the hamster wheel of pain. I ran out of titles. So this is some kind of pyramid. But these are the basics of what you should be thinking about what you're doing in security. First of all, and most importantly, you should know what you have and know what it's doing. And as Jack Daniel is fond of saying, if it were that easy, even you could do it. He usually says that to vendors. It is not that easy to know what you have and what it's doing. And you're always having to monitor and check and figure that part out. After you know what you have, controlling changes to it is another thing that is not as easy as it seems. Not just keeping people from changing it, but being able to make changes fast enough when you feel you need to do it. If you have to go through a change control board meeting once a week to make firewall rule changes, you can't respond inside of a week. Especially if they then mess up the firewall rules change and they need to change it back again, or they need to change it to something else, and it takes another week to go through the change control board meeting again. So being able to control changes, the speed of changes and whether changes happen at all, that's another basic. Understanding the threats that you're solving for is the next thing you need to be able to do. Because if you can't do any of that, then using security products is not going to help you. You can do all the vulnerability scans you want, but if you can't fix what you find and can't fix it in a timely fashion, then it's not useful. So really, you should be trying to do all of these things first before you start doing heavy spending on security products. So now we're going to look at another way of maybe thinking about doing security differently. Obviously, everybody knows that, the whole crunchy outside, soft and chewy inside, perimeters going away sort of talk. And obviously, excuse me, Google found this out, during Operation Aurora when they were hacked and they got religion and decided that this perimeter model was not a good one for them to be following. And let's face it, a sufficiently successful attacker looks exactly like an insider. So I heard of one incident where they'd compromised a system administrator's credentials. They came in through the sysadmin's home machine. They went straight in through the VPN to a domain controller. Exactly what you would expect a sysadmin to be doing, and that sysadmin to be doing. The only difference was the keyboard had been changed to Chinese. That's the only way they could tell that it was not the system administrator. So, deciding that there are insiders versus outsiders has always been kind of problematic. We know this. The other thing is that, we have third-party SaaS things, clouds out there. We have devices moving inside and outside of the perimeter. The other important thing that not a lot of people think about is that we are using personally a lot of the same apps that our companies are using now. If you're using Gmail for your company and Gmail for yourself, I have like 5 or 6 Gmail accounts. I'm sure there are people out here who have more. So it used to be that, you would go to work in a building inside the perimeter and you would fire up the ERP. If anybody uses ERP for fun outside of work, I want to know because I got to stage an intervention. But with many cloud-forward companies today, you are using the same stuff that your company is. So there's no perimeter. There is just a change in login name. So what do we do about this? Google came out with their Beyond Corp framework. Has anybody heard of this before? Okay, a few people have. Great. So they figured out how to do this, and this is all very, architecture-y and everything. You can look up their papers. They're very good. They're very well written. Let me break this down for you, though. Is what you can be doing is, first of all, authenticating the user with more than a password, which is what they do. Check the hygiene of the device. Now, it'd be great if you could check the health as well, if you could detect whether it was already pre-owned, but at least you can say, are they using a screen lock, or is it up to date as far as we can let them be up to date? Can we tell what is accessing our applications, including our SaaS applications, our external ones? Can we tell if they're using devices that we already know and trust? Are they using corporate-owned devices? Are they, is it a Deloitte consultant with a laptop that we've already looked at once? We're not managing it because it's Deloitte's, but at least we know we expect to see it accessing our application. And then making sure that the combination is together no matter where they are. So tying together the user and the device. This has a really powerful side effect of cutting down on the sources of account takeover attacks. Account takeover attacks are getting worse and worse, especially in retail, where they are trying user credentials from the credential dumps, and they're trying them either low and slow from IPs like one different IP a week to try to get underneath the detection level. They're trying them from the Mirai botnet, CCTV and DVR systems that are taking over. If you can cut away all of that and say, we never expect to see a login from anything except the devices we know about, that automatically, buys you a lot of extra protection. So it's this combination, this powerful combination that organizations are thinking about now. Because the attackers have to compromise a username and a password and the second factor, and yes, we know that 2FA phishing can work, but they also have to compromise the device that's being used, and it's just harder to do if they're patched and up to date. It's not impossible, but it's harder. So let's see if we can just raise the level of security incrementally. So, and the other great effect of this is it no longer matters where they are. It doesn't matter where the application is, whether it's internal or external. We don't care anymore because we're making the user and the device pass the same tests each time. This is the zero trust model that you're hearing about. It's not that we don't ever trust these devices. It's that we make everybody pass the same tests regardless of where they are. We don't automatically trust them based on their IP range or based on, whether we think we know where they are. So that it doesn't matter where the user is, it doesn't matter where the app is, as long as they stay with their device, they're good. So the perimeter is not going away. Nobody's throwing out their firewalls. Some of them still don't have firewalls. Some of them just got firewalls. That perimeter is not going away. It's just not going to be the only level of protection anymore, which it probably shouldn't have been to begin with. But I think we are moving in a direction that can allow us to get better at something that has been unaddressed, for a long time. I think we finally have the technology, the understanding, and the process to slowly be able to raise the level of security inside an organization to match what we already have on the outside. So you're going to hear a lot of this Beyond Corp talk, Beyond. Intel in their paper, they came up with the same thing. They call it Beyond the Edge. Google calls it Beyond Corp. You're going to see a lot of that stuff, but you're not going to see it from me because I'm done now. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming here. Anybody got any comments, questions, complaints? Take it up with the management. Yeah. Has anybody thought about these ideas already implementing? Yeah. How's that working for you?
Well, I'm a consultant, so for me, it's working with clients to get them to come around. Jackworks is a great example of a startup that's greenfield right now, and I'm convincing them of the usefulness of that approach. And they're buying into it. They're absolutely on board with it. So.
Okay. Good deal. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I'll see you around the conference. Have a good day.